I found out on my way. He moved away one day, so they say, from Harlem. I can go still. Now, you can't keep me away from where I was baptized by the Lord. Now, you can't keep me away from where I was born. I was baptized by the Lord. I found out on my way through Harlem.
Hey, Dave.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Actually, pretty well.
Good.
Been stretched a lot lately, but I'm doing okay. And I apologize for my confusion that I thought she was actually speaking, but it was a good gesture to ISOC to bring her in. And I suspect what she thinks is going to be a topic you'll like to discuss.
Was baptized by my daddy's horn. No, you can't keep
I assume you know that the background's on my screen, but you're not.
Here I am.
Yeah, I just don't feel like cleaning the house, so I'm on voice.
I understand.
Now, what can you say about digital divide partner?
Francel, I'm about to let her in.
Does that work?
Francella.
Why is that not working? Oh, okay, good. I'm not muted. Sorry, I was like trying to make sure I didn't know if you guys did, if this is also taped on video. I wasn't sure. So like what you guys did. So I was about to get on my computer, but my internet is always dodgy. So that's why I also like call in on my phone.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And
Okay.
so you're just doing a voice recording, yeah?
No, we're doing a video and voice.
Oh, okay. Well then.
Is that okay? You look great.
No, that's fine. I'm just wondering, is it better for me to let me do it on my, actually no, I'll do it on my phone because then I don't have to worry. Hold on one second.
Okay.
I don't have to worry about losing my internet connection. I'm gonna get a book just to put under it. It's actually something that I deal with every week. Not sometimes, I deal with it every single week.
I hear you.
Sorry about that. It's kind of a nightmare. So,
well, you're doing something that was very embarrassing for MSNBC the other day.
What'd I do?
They lost the audio live on air nationwide and didn't have a phone backup.
I am hip to that game because people would be shocked that I live downtown in DC. I live on 3rd Street. And I've only had 2 weeks of uninterrupted internet since COVID started, only 2. So every single week, at least 3 times a week, I get dropped off of Zoom calls. I lose service completely. It is frequent, regular, and ongoing. There's just no escape from it. So it's hard when I get invited to providers calls with like, them telling me, don't worry, everything's great. Network's never been better than ever. It's kind of like my neighborhood.
So the question is why yours has a problem. Is it Comcast?
The irony of it, they were one of the first to invite me to a provider call. So it was just really hard because, I'm not trying to put companies on blast. I'm just totally confused as to, there's actually somebody who works for there who lives like not even 6 blocks from my house. So I'm kind of like, what's it look like in your house? Because I know it's a mess at my house and my neighbors say the same thing. So I honestly have no idea why they can't figure this out. Not a clue. So
It should just get escalated.
Well,
because-
Dave, let's get started. I just want to formally introduce the show,
sure.
and we can get started.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay.
Okay.
So, welcome to Community and Technology. We connect the global community with news,
Thank
information,
you.
and resources to hopefully make your life better. I'm Stu Reed. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Bernstein. Hey, Dave.
Hi, and we've got somebody who's trying to do
Yeah,
something.
this is a very special edition of Community and Technology today, Streamcast, co-sponsored by the Internet Society, along with the WHCR FM and the Streaming University Project. And we have a very special guest today, Francella Ochillo, who is the Executive Director of Next Century Cities. She's an attorney and digital rights advocate who has worked on a variety of technology and telecommunications issues with a specific focus on assessing the impact of policy proposals on unserved and underserved communities. Francella is a member of the District of Columbia Bar and Federal Communications Bar Association and represents Next Century Cities on the FCC's Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee's Disaster and Response Recovery Working Group. Francella, welcome to Community and Technology.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited, and thank you for the warm welcome. And I have to say before I get started, just based on the emails that you guys sent, this is a production with a whole lot of love. So I'm really excited to be a part of it and just to offer our voice in any way I hope that it helps.
Well, thank
And
you.
we can help people get connected.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what we plan to do.
Okay, well, before we get into the nuts and bolts, just tell us a little bit about yourself, Francella, if you don't mind, and how you got to where you are today, and a little bit about your journey.
Okay, as you mentioned, my name is Francella. I am Executive Director of Next Century Cities based in Washington, D.C. Our goal for our organization is simple, just to make sure that we are elevating local efforts to expand connectivity. Our goal is to get high-speed connectivity to every single resident in every single community in the United States, and we won't rest until it's done. Our work is about making sure that local officials have a voice in local policy at state levels and also at federal levels. We work to not only be matchmakers in terms of community learning between municipal officials, but also to make sure that local officials are having opportunities to tell their own stories and say, how can you help? And make sure we're connecting the dots, because one thing that we've noticed when we talk to even leaders at the state and federal levels, they might not really know what's happening in those districts and in those communities. So we sometimes have to actually point out, look, here's a great example of where this system is working. Here is an ongoing need where you guys can get involved. And so more than anything, what I've really learned over the past almost 5 years now or 4 or 5 years that I've been doing this work, is to acknowledge the power that you have wherever you are. I don't think you need to be cloaked in an organization or a local or appointed official to have power in this conversation. I think that COVID has taught us the importance of storytelling and for people to get involved and to say that if you're disappointed that, little Susie Q can't finish her algebra homework, or you're frustrated that you're like, even some of the teachers don't have the digital tools that they need to do online curriculum, then you can get involved. You can bring that up at a town hall meeting. You can write to your member of Congress. You can ask questions of your governor. We have an obligation, whether we are connected or disconnected, to actually make this a part of the conversation at every single level of government with every single opportunity. Because truthfully, the fact that we're like at the cusp of like a digital revolution, where essentially those who are connected are the ones who have opportunities, and the people who are disconnected are the ones who are essentially not only being left behind, but will actually be exploited, because they will be forced into having to hold on to jobs that essentially might pay less, that essentially they have, they don't have the same quality of life, they don't have the same opportunities, but that doesn't mean they're any less talented. And so I think we need to find ways to make sure that we are bringing in our best and our brightest from every single corner of the community. And what that takes is making sure that everyone has access to the same digital ecosystem.
Well, you know, we're here in New York City, and you probably know a bit about some of the underserved folks here in the city, in particular, the public housing community, which my group, Digital Divide Partners, and the Internet Society is partnering with us as well to help bridge the gap there. The public housing community in New York City is as large as the city of Atlanta. It's population-wise, almost 500,000 folks living in public housing here in New York City. And, you know, it's a bit of a oxymoron, but living in the most sophisticated city in the country, or at least one of, we think we're the most sophisticated as New Yorkers. One of the most sophisticated cities in New York. Right here in this population, 50% of folks in public housing don't have internet at home. Amazing statistic. And another statistic, 50% of public housing folks are unemployed, 50%. And the folks that are employed, the average income is at the poverty line. It's like $24,000 average family income for folks in public housing. So it's a tremendously under-resourced community that we've been working with, and Dave has helped out, the Internet Society has helped out. My partner, who couldn't be on the call with me today, Doug Frazier, and I, we've been working for over a decade, partnering with community folks, with resident associations and community organizations to actually solve the problem themselves. I was kind of encouraged by some of the things I saw on your website about community partnerships and stakeholders taking control. And that's what we have really worked with stakeholders here on the ground to actually provide their own internet access. And what we found, and this is a conversation we've been back and forth with Dave a little bit about, and others, you know, many folks talk about affordable internet. And, you know, one of the things that we say for our communities here is that, you know, you really can't talk about affordable when you're talking about poor people that are struggling to pay bills, to put food on the table, put their kids through school. So our whole position has been that we need to provide free internet access to folks in public housing. That is kind of a joke to talk about affordable when folks are at the poverty line, unemployed, and struggling with day-to-day decisions about where to spend their next dollar. And you know, even though there's a lot of largesse out there from corporate providers providing quote unquote low-income, affordable access, in reality, for many folks, the only thing that's affordable is free. And that's what we've been doing. And the other thing that we've learned, Francois, I'm gonna let you respond, but one of the things that we've learned is that so many folks, particularly seniors and struggling parents, are, you know, they struggle with the idea of why should I allocate any of my scarce resources to the internet? They don't really see the value proposition until you kind of like put it in front of them. And so, you know, making it free, providing the service, and providing applications that make sense to them, that actually talk to their needs. That's one of the big things that we focus on is, okay, here's the internet, what do you do with it? And so we have focused a lot on community generated content. And we've started something called streaming stations, streaming community news stations, where we're giving a voice to folks in public housing to tell their own stories, to put out their own narrative. And it's really taken hold. We've been doing it for about two and a half, almost 3 years now. And it's something that residents have really grabbed onto as a tool and a way for them to express themselves and get their stories out there. So I just want to get your reaction to that and whether or not you've seen that kind of model in any other localities. I know you have a large scope of vision.
There's a couple of things that I want to make sure that I get to, because in particular, the project that you just mentioned just speaks to me when you say about the streaming community stories. I think that a lot of people don't think about the fact that if you are in a household at or below the poverty line, you are more likely to get your news from a local source than you would if you were a person who was either even middle or high income. And I think that sometimes I think there's an assumption that because a lot of people are getting news from social media, they might be able to choose lots of different channels with cable and also other technologies. The truth is that some of the most marginalized, whether it's low income households where English is not the first language, disabled, those disenfranchised communities actually rely on community sources, not only to get news, but even trusted resources for information. So when
Right.
you have emergencies, like, when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and you have whether it's a natural disaster or for whatever other reason, those people that are the hardest to reach are going to be looking to community resources for trusted information. And so as we have more consolidation and a lot of those community voices become more scarce, I think that it's really important for us to ask hard questions about what is the replacement. Because as those local newsrooms become, it's like as they start to go down to their skeleton crews and you have fewer people on the beat asking questions, whether it's vetting candidates for office or asking questions about how city budgets are spent, those are really important things. And I think that in general, it's not just important to the people who rely on it, it is at the core of a healthy democracy to make sure that you always have people asking questions, starting from the local level and working outwards. To something that you said at the beginning, thinking about the size of this issue, the enormity of it, even in the city of New York, where you have around 500,000 people in public housing, you also have around 500,000 to 600,000 people who do not have any reliable access to broadband, period. And I think that people would be surprised to find out that in the boroughs of New York, that was that much of a pervasive problem. And
Yeah.
I think when we're thinking through solutions, we also have to think about how this intersects with other things and how cycles of poverty are cross-sectional issues. It's not that I'm not under any delusion that if we are to give a household that's struggling with poverty access to broadband, that all of a sudden that's going to solve their problems with whether it's car payments or rent or how am I going to get to this job. But what we are saying is that it gives them options. And I think that when you're talking about, especially, you made a comment about it, the value proposition for people who essentially are making really tough decisions. Very often, and I'm in meetings in DC, and sometimes, you'll be with people in DC are a little bit sometimes far removed from what happens in a lot of other places. And sometimes when you're having just a normal conversation, I think sometimes people forget about there's a large portion of America that has to make really hard decisions every month. They actually think about, am I going to be able to make a car payment on time? Am I going to be able to eat out this Friday? Am I going to be able to pay for my kids, athletic gear or, whatever that is? All of those little extras are actually decisions that they have to make. It does not come instinctually in a way that I don't think is even present in those conversations in DC. So if we acknowledge that a lot of the people who are designing policy have never really had to face that type of reality, they don't struggle with those types of decisions on the 28th of the month because the 30th is coming. They don't think about those last few days, maybe where you don't have food. They just don't think about those things. So this idea of saying, oh, but there are affordable options like Lifeline. It's a $925 subsidy. You're going to get this phone. It's going to be awesome. Hopefully they service in your area. We already have a win there. That is only part of the problem. So I'm with you on this idea that when we are talking about households that are really almost arrested by poverty, right? There are some things that we're not going to be able to solve with a small subsidy. That is going to be systemic change, thinking about all hands on deck. How can we get involved? How do we really think about cross-sectional issues, like problem solving? Another thing that I always want to think about is that when I hear outsiders talk about, well, we can't make the case, like these communities don't really understand the value of connectivity. It worries me when we frame it that way, because the truth is, when we have digital access, we don't have geographic borders limiting us. It doesn't limit what we see. It doesn't limit what we dream about. It doesn't limit the job that we apply for. We don't have to be limited by the G8 bus line that runs through my neighborhood. I don't have to be limited by, the train stops running at 11. So I have to make sure I'm on this side of town so I can walk the rest of the way home from the stop. I don't have to make those types of decisions. So if we can put ourselves in that mindset, that it's not that people don't want it, I think that sometimes people are literally limited by their geographies. And when we are freed by that, we forget that there are still some people who are limited by those same zip codes. So we really have to think carefully about, you know, bringing people in the spirit of collaboration, that just because you don't speak my language and you don't know to call it broadband doesn't mean that you don't understand the power of digital connectivity. What it means is that it didn't make the list this month. And I
Mhm.
think that there is a very, very significant difference. And it comes from a place of acknowledging that not all of us are a part of the haves. And I think that that doesn't make people less valuable when they aren't on that side of the column. And one more thing that I did want to bring up that is something that is literally rancid in all sorts of filings that I see, and sometimes the conversations that we have, is that sometimes when I hear people who are connected talk about, well, we already, did this and we're doing all these efforts and we're trying to give these kids computers and, we did our best, right? And then COVID happened. And then all of a sudden people were like, holy bazookas, we needed to do more, right? Because this isn't just my neighbor's problem. I found out little Susie Q can't do her algebra in my neighborhood. So this is awkward. I didn't think it was my problem. We have to be able to frame this issue in a way that people who are connected understand that there is a cost also on us when the disconnected remain that way. Because there is a cost when we actually lose their talent, their work ethic, their industry, all of those things in our workforce. There is a cost when we have large portions of our school children who can't have the same education. There is a cost when people in one part of the country do not have access to the same type of information that another person has in another part of the country at the same time. And so when we're talking about these real time, transmissions of information, getting real time updates, being able to participate in ongoing conversations that shape our democracy, I think we need to ask really hard questions about this idea that if I'm connected, we're okay. I'm okay. Well, I just have to worry about my family. And that's not where we are. I think we're in a place where everyone is going to have to claim a piece of trying to solve this digital divide, acknowledging that it might be, I am concerned citizen and I'm going to bring it up in a town hall meeting, or I'm a provider and I'm going to ask questions about the low cost service that we're offering, or maybe I'm a city council person and I'm asking, where can we actually partner with unlikely partners that might have been adversarial, but to bring people in to say, how can we solve this together? I think that this is a place where we're all going to have to start using some imagination and calling in favors to come up with some new ideas and inviting new people to the table, because this is not a problem that we can solve with one point of view, and there's not one part of the solution that's going to apply to all communities. So to your overall point, how can we really bring people in? I think that we just need to start with having conversations about who is actually deputized as a valid contributor to this conversation. And just because you weren't invited into this room traditionally, just because you don't have the right connections, doesn't mean that you don't have a valid point of view, because I don't know how we can solve a problem for people who are disconnected without including them in the strategies to solve it.
Mhm. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, so often what I see from where I sit is paternalism, where
Mhm.
other folks are identifying the problem, other folks are specifying the solutions, and then providing them and expecting folks to say, oh, thank you very much. Here's what you need. We solve your problem, and move on. And that is, that really turns things on its head when you really need the folks on the ground, the end users, stakeholders, those folks defining what the issues are and defining how the problem should be solved and attacked. And I'm encouraged by the whole Black Lives Matters protest that's happening, and just a general raising of consciousness about folks of color and just the inequities that are throughout the whole system. And of course, broadband and the digital divide is just one of the many divides that we as Black and brown folks are sitting on the wrong side of. But I think the movement, and I must say, I think that the COVID pandemic as well has served to raise consciousness just about how we are all connected and in the same boat together. And so,
I want to make sure I pick up on that piece of what you said, that we're
Mhm.
all connected to each other. We belong to each other.
That's
I
right.
mean, this idea that I can do it alone, it doesn't make any sense. We
Mhm.
can't make policy alone. We can't fund it alone. We can't make it work alone. The entire digital ecosystem actually benefits from more people being a part of it, and not just as consumers, but as contributors. And I think that really thinking about this idea that, oh, well, I just want to get people online so they can order goods and services. Maybe they can, get government the information or X, Y, and Z. But I think in general, we're looking to arm people with to be able to contribute to a digital economy. So I
Mhm.
think that this is really about empowerment. And I think that, to the, the social unrest and a lot of questions and uncomfortable conversations people are willing to have now, I say, especially as it comes to our work on the digital divide, this should be a moment where, as we're talking about the communities that are most impacted, I don't want to go into a meeting about the digital divide and have people say, well, 40% of African American and Latino families are offline, and 50% of indigenous families who live on tribal lands are offline, without seeing them in the room.
Right.
So don't tell me
Right.
about
Mhm.
these great statistics and then I'm the only one in the room.
Right.
It's the kind of stuff that, if we were in any other place, in any other work, that wouldn't make sense. Like, I'm not going to go and design a building and then not invite architects. I'm
Mhm.
not going to, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to go to teach geometry and then bring English books. I'm going to make sure I have the tools that I need
Right.
and to actually have the right reference point. So I think that some of this is just about being able to move a little bit closer to people who might not have been in the circle, and to say, how can we support you? Rather than just this being this idea of rescuing people, but to really empower them to be a part of whatever the matrix is that we move forward with.
Mhm. Absolutely. One point I also wanted to get your take on. One of the things that is kind of one of our overriding mantras is that we really are working to transform our communities and our people from mere consumers of technology
Mhm.
to creators, producers, and owners. And
Amazing.
we try and put applications and tools in their hands to encourage that. And the whole streaming station concept that grew out of
Mhm.
that, and that's kind of taken off. I wonder what your take is on that transformation.
That just makes my heart smile just hearing you say it. And I think that part of it is because there aren't enough of those happening. I mean, public access channels are running out of money and drying up. A lot of these community broadcasting stations, and like again, there's a new breed of like podcasts and things like that. So I totally think that that's fair, and I don't know that it's a substitute. I think it's something that's a little bit of a parallel universe. But I think that importantly, think about, where is talent cultivated? And so the thing is, talent is cultivated in local places where people find mentorship and find interesting stories about culture and this human stories. And I think that that's not something that we can replace with just saying, oh, it'll be fine. They'll just get online. There's something that is very authentic and real about that not only happening at like the traditional production rooms, but also where it is happening, to make sure it is happening in those communities. Because there is something that's a little bit disingenuous about me saying, oh, I want to tell a New Yorker story based out of some podcast studio in San Francisco. And I think that there's something that, if I wanted to tell a Washingtonian story, part of the beauty of it is to be able to walk through Adams Morgan and run into a mural, or be able to walk across LaDroit Park and see, oh, this is where the first doctor lived. And part of that like comes from the texture of being in those neighborhoods where the magic happens. So
Mhm.
it's not at all that I don't think that it's important to have new innovation and new ideas and really new opportunities for maybe a new generation of creators, that maybe, like the beauty of YouTube, where everybody can be a star. That's wonderful. It's not that it's not something, it's always going to be something that I think there's room for that. But I want to make sure that we're also preserving opportunities for people to grow up in newsrooms and to make sure that their local stories can be told by trusted resources that have really been not only shepherds of those stories, but actually like participated in cultivating community.
Mhm. Yeah, the trusted local resource is so important, particularly in this age where there's so much disinformation out there
Mhm.
and just so much, BS, if you will, on social media. I mean, just how do you know what to believe? And
Mm.
trusted local sources is just so critical. And I just wanted to mention one other thing and wonder whether or not you had any experience with that in some of the other areas. We, after Hurricane Sandy here in New York City,
Mhm.
in association with the WHCR Radio and City College in Harlem, we started something called the WHCR Emergency Broadcast Team, where we collect information from the community and then broadcast it back out over the radio and to keep people informed about local issues.
Mhm.
One of the things that we found during that emergency, Hurricane Sandy, we heard about stuff downtown, but we didn't hear about what was happening in the neighborhood. And so we created this whole network of folks, and we now have a number of communication platforms, including walkie-talkies, two-way radios that we discovered back in Hurricane Sandy. When the internet went down and when cell
Yes.
sites went down, that was the only thing that worked. So we are deploying a walkie-talkie mobile radio network with community folks who are in charge of reporting to each other about what's going on. And it's really been, it was really important in Sandy, but then when the COVID crisis hit again, all of a sudden we're kind of remobilized. And we've
Yes.
been doing weekly reports, daily reports, using the walkie-talkies, using streaming technology. And again, a lot of this came from resident leaders in public
Mhm.
housing who came to us and said, we don't know what's going on in our buildings. We need a way to communicate with our people locally, right here on the ground, about what's happening right here in our development. And so we kind of went into action again with the two-way radios, with the streaming technology, and giving again folks tools to take control of their own ecosystem, if you will, and their own
Mhm.
communications ecosystem. That's really what I'm trying to say, so that they're in control, talking to each other, communicating with each other, keeping each other safe and smart.
And speaking as somebody who's from Louisiana, where hurricanes used to shut the city
Mm.
down for 2 and 3 days at a time, it was actually very normal up until Hurricane Katrina. You usually didn't actually leave. You would just go home, and it would usually flood on the first day. It would hopefully recede by the second day, and by the third day, you'd be back at school. But it was very normal. The levees used to overflow all the time. And but of course, that was a day when back in the day when not everyone had a cell phone. When I think a little bit about now, the idea of if people might leave their homes, they might forget something, you might forget something that you would have taken with you to your office, your lunch, your things like that, but you're not going to leave without your cell phone. And so, really thinking about this idea that if you're not connected, that is your currency. And so, it's really important for us to make sure that we do have stopgaps that are essentially what happens when the internet goes down, and how do we keep those types of community networks alive. And one of the best parts of your story that you mentioned was that you had people in a building who are saying, we need to know what's happening in our community. And I think all the time, when people now are talking about digital governance and how that impacts people's ability to essentially weigh in on city council meetings, talk about things in public forums. And I think about the people who don't get to city council meetings, but are very much leaders in their community. They don't run for office, but everyone knows who they are. It's like when you
Mhm.
think about when a lot of small businesses were really evaporated during COVID, and really thinking about the culture. If you were to walk down these streets of what the barber shop or the convenience store owner or the local musician, like all of those things that those people add to communities. And the thing is, those aren't people that we see in city council meetings. They don't normally have a public platform, but they are very much people that you need to stay connected to, especially in times of an emergency. So I think that it behooves all of us to be thinking about what type of networks do we have in place, not just to have digital, networks replace them, but to really make sure that we have them running on parallel tracks, because one does not supplant the other. And I
Mhm.
think that, for me, when I think about just locally, it's like the idea of, like, when Hurricane Katrina really just changed, New Orleans. And there were some places there you go, and when they were trying to bring it back to life, they literally like raised a certain community and then they put in a Walmart.
Mm.
And it was like, okay, I guess. Like, Walmart's great. Um, but there was something about it that you can bring back a store, but you can't bring back the culture, right? And so
Mhm.
the thing is, it's this idea when I think of, like, yes, that was going to be what part of what helped bring the population back. Because remember, a lot of people had to scatter around the country and literally had to start new lives in other places and left all of their belongings in Louisiana.
Mhm.
So when I think about now, when we're talking about how some of these digital networks, I don't want it to be the Walmart that like takes the place of those types of networks.
Mhm.
I think of that as being something that's a choice. That's being something that gives people options, that gives them a little bit more, even whether it's economic mobility, options on healthcare, options on education, that just opens the door to other alternatives, but certainly not something to replace something that's a community institution.
Mhm. Well, speaking of parallel platforms, I've got to say that many folks are listening to WHCR FM 90.3, the voice of Harlem. We're also streaming live on YouTube as well as on our Streaming University project sites. Dave, you've been awful quiet there. Why don't you join the conversation?
Well, I defer to the two of you about day-to-day community organizing and how to make things happen in the community. I've been there, but it's a long time ago in a different
And
community.
I'm like so honored that you just associated me with a community organizer. I have met lots of them here in DC, and they are just some of the most noble, interesting, creative, intensely hardworking people that I've ever met. And especially, being in a place that is always home to protests.
Mhm.
It's not
Well,
necessarily because of now, but every week. But I feel honored to even be associated with those creatures.
yeah, and you happen to be extraordinarily articulate. We haven't met. I just invited you because you were talking about the right issues. Uh,
Oh.
and I'm very, very impressed. But my my issues are the practicalities of making it so.
Mhm.
Not the process, but
Yep.
what is actually going to get another 10 million people Lifeline
Yes. Mhm.
or whatever else it takes. What's the opposition in DC that has to be overcome to make the decisions, which are actually relatively cheap and fairly easy to connect everybody?
I think that sometimes this isn't always about money. It's like when we talk about programs like Lifeline, that's a great example. I don't know that Lifeline, the arguments that people have around it are about funding. I don't. I think that there are programs that end up getting a political stain, that end up being associated with conversations that are unpopular, or people who don't have a lot of leverage. I think that in general, it's almost like when you think of, when you hear about rural broadband, there's always, it's a sexy topic. People want to like find out ways. That's awesome. I totally agree. We need to find ways to talk about rural broadband and to connect 40% of the people who are in those areas. What I didn't miss is that there are millions of disconnected people in urban communities. They're in underserved communities. So I don't think that we should be talking about urban or rural. I think we should be talking about urban and rural, because of the fact that I, I would imagine that if I were to talk to somebody in, I don't know, if I was talking to somebody in Four State, Louisiana, and somebody who's in, New York City, and if both of them are disconnected, I'd imagine they'd have similar frustrations. They want good things to happen to their family. They want to be able to take care of them. They want their kids to have the best education. They want to have access to healthcare. I don't think they really care that one's in an urban community and one's in rural. So I think that sometimes just being able to disarm people from the political conversations around it, and really try to get to the human impact side is something that I'm constantly aware of. But the truth is that's not how policy moves. Policy moves on dollars and cents. And so, and the people who are talking about policy are the people who have power. We have an extremely powerful political extremely powerful process for lobbyists in DC. So if lobbyists are behind
Wait a
certain
minute.
issues,
Are you telling me that DC is dominated by lobbyists?
well, I just want to make sure your listeners know, because I think that quite frankly, outside of DC, I didn't know how intense this was. This is like, this is some stuff that I think, you know, long before I, you know, when I still lived in Chicago in West Loop before it was cool, this is the stuff I saw on TV, and I didn't think that. And I think that when you get here and you realize that, you know, there is room, there's plenty of room at the table for other people, but I think that people like to keep it small and keep the circle tight. And so, you know, my job is to really ask questions about who's invited, to really get us to start thinking about the perspectives that aren't at the table, that aren't included in the conversation, and to ask hard questions about the programs that are not only able to help people and to solve the problem, but why they're underutilized. And, you know, one of the things, you know, when you're talking about the nuts and bolts of how, so if we were to start with just like USF funds that are assigned to help low-income families get connectivity through Lifeline, why are we constantly arguing about the validity of the program? There is no other federal program that is designed to help low-income families get online. There's just no other one. There are state programs, there are nonprofit programs, there are corporate programs, but there's no other federal subsidy that's designed to be a telecommunications subsidy. And what that does is it gives low-income families that qualify a $9.25 subsidy so that they can essentially get a handset. The subsidies for the service, but usually the provider offers the handset as a courtesy, and they have access to the internet on their smartphone. The problem that I have is that when I'm thinking about it, I'm asking questions just as an observer, just as a citizen. I'm like, well, why are only a third of the people who are eligible for the program participating? And I remember when I first started asking that question, it was like, well, it's not our job to, you know, advertise, providers advertise for the program. And I'm like, okay, well, can't the agency just tell people it's available? Like, I live in DC and I wouldn't have known it was available. Even if I don't qualify, I didn't even know it existed. So these are little questions that I feel like in any other city, I think that would be the first question people would ask. But it seemed a little bit like there's a lot of smoke and mirrors for me to ask that really simple question. And so, you know, the barricades sometimes when I'm thinking that shouldn't be a difficult lift. And then you find out it's cloaked in all sorts of like political drippings of, I don't want to be associated with it. You tried to cut the program. You cut out providers. It's just like, it's packed with a whole lot. And so, you know, I think in general, you know, and also low income families are not the only ones that I'm worried about. You know, COVID has really like put a light on a lot of middle income families that were all of a sudden thrust into unemployment. So it's not necessarily that they would qualify for that otherwise, but in general, people are starting to ask really hard questions about what do I qualify for? How can I get support? I'm having to make some hard decisions about my car payment versus broadband versus food versus fill in the blank. And so I think that this has kind of opened up the door to kind of talk a little bit more about, okay, well, maybe we do need to take a more expansive view of that. But in general, government moves slowly. So the thing is, by the time that we are able to agree on what are we able to do, I think that a lot of the times you start thinking about, okay, well, let's make sure that the solution that we want is actually going to still be a good fit a year or two from now, because it's not going to happen right now. And so that's why even when we're asking questions about, for example, are the speeds adequate, right? I think that in general, you know, it's really exciting to be talking about 5G in some communities. That's amazing. I think that there are a lot of communities that are connected that are going to benefit from 5G. I think there are a lot of municipalities that are going to be able to put in smart city applications and really capitalize on the power of high-speed connectivity in a way that they might not with a 3 or 4G network.
You can't see me shaking my head.
Oh,
That's just,
oh, great.
because I'm just on voice here. I'm not on video. But that's the kind of nonsense that is all over Washington, and people just
And it's
people in Washington listen to the lobbyists much too much. It turns out 5G does absolutely nothing for smart cities, is
You
not
know,
much faster, is
than
not going to
4G.
do anything for the communities, and mostly is being talked about because it was a way for the lobbyists to persuade people to give their clients money. Now,
And I so and I well, the only thing I will say is that I don't know how I feel about true 5G technology is not available. So the thing is, it's not like you can go pick up a 5G phone and experience this, amazing speeds.
but it
So the
doesn't
thing
have
is,
those
and I know that,
amazing speeds.
well, some
That's something
people,
that people are not realizing. Nearly
yes,
all
that
the
it's taxed.
speed you need has already happened in 4G. In
Yes.
fact, most of the 5G in this country is not going to be much faster than 4G. They
That's
say
correct.
about the latency is so low and how quickly it gets. Do you know what the latency is on the best 5G in the country?
What is it?
30 milliseconds.
Okay, and what's the okay.
There was a dream that because you can get 1 millisecond in the laboratory, that was what was going to be delivered. There was a dream that it would be fast enough that it would be just like you were there.
Mhm.
There was a dream that it would have made it cheaper to build an autonomous car, which still are years away for other reasons, by putting it inside the phone network, and so on. It turns out that
And
that has nothing whatsoever to do with what they're building. That was based on being incredibly fast, but it doesn't work. It is too expensive, and nobody in the world is building it at that level. Now, some people are doing some things that are better. Verizon actually is building in about a third of the country, very slowly, the fastest network in the world. That's using millimeter waves. They're high frequencies. We didn't know how to use them 10 years ago, so there was a whole lot of empty space there. And my friend Ted Rappaport proved they could be used. That was about 7 years ago. Nobody in the industry thought it was possible, and now it's happening. That is faster. That's a good thing, mostly because it gives you more capacity. But think a minute. Right now, the average 4G phone in Canada is running at 75 megabits. What major application do you know that runs better at 200 megabits or even 1,000 megabits than at 75 megabits?
Probably none.
I don't. Yeah, I was like, I don't. I feel like
don't know.
this is where my gamers come in and they try to tell me, they tell me about all the things I don't appreciate. The gamers always correct me. So
Mhm.
The gamers like this some, but it turns out it makes very little difference for gaming, partly because they haven't built the low latency networks they're talking about and are not going there, and partly because the gamers are gaming against somebody on the other side of the country.
that's
They're
true.
not gaming against somebody on the same cell tower as they are.
Right.
So speeding up what's happening at the cell tower, which is where you're talking 4G and 5G,
Yes.
does very little for them. That happens to be another one of the lies out there that has been spread in order to, in the first place, 7 years ago, sell the equipment. And then once telcos decided to buy some of the equipment, they're trying to persuade people it's going to be wonderful. My sources do things like build networks. My sources on this are, well, the CTO of Telefónica. That's a Spanish phone company that has huge operations in England and in Germany. One of the biggest in the world. And from there, they're saying that there's nothing today that you can do on 5G that you can't do perfectly fine on 4G, and it's all hype. The technical people have been saying it's hype, it's hype, it's hype, and it hasn't gotten to you, and you care about this stuff.
Yeah.
How many people who build networks have you spoken to?
Oh, you mean, well, I mean, like I run into people from the telco companies, but they're not the
No,
people
no, no,
climbing
no. The
towers.
people working
So-
in telephone companies are not the people who build networks. Remember
Right. So
that
that's why I'm saying they're not out there climbing towers. Like I agree with you.
No,
So the
no,
thing is, they're very
towers. They don't even understand what's going on in the towers. For example, how many more? This is a Washington's question, but it's one that
Okay.
I'm giving to you to bring it home to you.
Yeah.
2 years ago, a pile of people in Washington, including the chief of the FCC, said we're going to need 400,000 small cells, which are a way of delivering this stuff,
Mhm.
and that we need to make it faster because 5G is so important, and that's what's going to be for 5G.
And
So
just
they
to clarify,
turned
you're
around-
talking about the small cell order, or which one? What are
Yeah,
you
I'm
talking
talking about the
Okay.
small cell order. Okay.
Yeah.
The small cell order basically made it cheaper and faster for the phone companies to put in these small cells.
Right.
Okay. And you hear a lot of people in Washington say that that was a success for 5G. Now, how many
Providers say that that was a success. Local officials think it was a nightmare.
local officials are losing a lot of money and they're losing flexibility to demand things, and they were against it. But they didn't turn around and say something that I happen to know because I listened to the financial call from Crown Castle, which builds more small cells than anybody else,
Mhm.
about half the country. And they said it didn't make much difference. That the actual number of small cells being built today, a year and a half or whatever after that order was supposed to do so much, is about the same as they planned in the first place.
I will say that I
That's
think
the kind
specifically
of
about the
thing-
small cell. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't mean to run over you because I can't
No,
see you. I can't see you, so that's why I couldn't see you when you started talking. Sorry about that.
Yeah, but no. How many people that you're dealing with in Washington who are dealing with issues like this actually know that that order did not result in any more small cells?
I think that there are very few of them that are doing analysis on the actual, like whether or not the order was effective in their municipality. I think that a lot of the injury that came out of that order was the fact that this was essentially an edict to tell local officials, this is what you need to do. This is basically how you need to accommodate this. And it was very much another like high five to providers, like you guys got what you asked for. And so that's part of what was the injury to local officials, that they weren't even cited in the order, that there wasn't much outreach to think about how those things would affect their municipalities. And quite frankly, local officials are constantly on, they're in a reactive posture rather than being able to be in a collaborative posture with the agency. Our job at Next Century Cities is to make sure that we're at least getting local officials into the room. There are other organizations that do the same. However, quite frankly, providers have lobbyists who speak that language all year long. They are teaching the agency, this is what we need, this is what we want to see, this is the type of language you should use. Providers have a very, very like intense matrix of not only deploying, whether it's talking points, messaging, this is what would be great for us, but also being able to be there in person, having the capacity that simply local officials don't have. So when it comes to those types of orders, quite frankly, I don't know how effective it's going to be when not only the small cell order, but even thinking about the 5G orders, thinking about, whether or not they're really closing the digital divide, and they're constantly having, orders about, well, we're going to improve mapping, and then it doesn't really happen. So the thing is, there are lots of things where I feel like what the agency is hoping to do sometimes falls short of what actually happens. But in terms of the process about collaborating with the actual providers, for example, I was in a meeting with Crown Castle just probably 2 months ago. And even in those conversations, I think that they, in a sense, are getting the picture that we should probably do more to do outreach. But in general, providers are emboldened to do what they think is in their best financial interest. which is why there are digital deserts. So the thing is, if they're going to keep doing things that only have a return on their investment, and essentially there's no obligation to go to places just because it's the right thing to do or it would serve the community, then I think we need to ask hard questions about the government that's regulating them, and asking hard questions about, well, is the agency doing enough to intervene? Because for years and now decades,
we're talking about the
go ahead.
FCC under people who do not believe they should intervene, right? The biggest
Oh,
thing
I
you're getting
agree.
from them is
Yes.
they want to deregulate and let the industry do it because they believe that the market will solve these things. And you and
They
I
will
know
tell me that
the mar-
every day, every day. Yes, they tell me that all the time. Yes,
right. And you and I both know that the market hasn't solved these things. You started this show by putting out
Yes.
numbers of people who aren't
Yes.
being served.
of course.
Okay. So part of it is the truth, that you're having trouble getting the truth to be heard in Washington.
Oh, definitely.
Because you don't have $100 million budget like my friends at AT&T do.
That is true. That is true. 100%.
Right. So have you met David of Comcast? Chief Lobbyist of
One more time
Comcast?
about Comcast, because you're breaking up. Say that one more time.
Dave, you broke up. Repeat.
Stu, can you hear?
Uh-huh.
I couldn't hear him. He broke up for me too, Francella.
Sorry. David Cohen of Comcast was their leading lobbyist.
Okay.
He was paid, do you know how much he was paid a year?
I don't. I don't.
It was in the financial documents, $18 million.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The top people on the other side on your discussions, they're paid millions. The going rate for a partner in a Washington Wall Street law firm is about $5.
Dave, you're breaking up again. Let me just interject. We're kind of headed towards the end of the show here. So if we can kind of get some conclusionary remarks from Dave to Francella, and then let Francella respond back. Dave.
Okay.
And oh, good. I was about to
let
say
me focus
respond to
you on
something
something
you
you
said.
care about and can do.
Oh, I care about everything you're
Something
saying.
that I may happen to know a little bit about that isn't as obvious in Washington. Right now, do you know David Rettel? He was Trump's first guy at the NTIA.
Yes. David was so wonderful. I invited him to speak at our bipartisan tech conference. He only did it because we were at tech summer camp together in Aspen. So yes, I do know David. Yes. He's one of my Republican peeps. Yeah.
Yeah, I get along with a lot of the conservative Republicans, although my politics are obviously on the left. Well, I was on a Columbia webinar with David not long ago, and he said something remarkable has happened in Washington. That the people he knows who have always opposed what it takes to connect everybody are realizing, because of COVID, that they're wrong. And that's actually changing. So this is, as I say, a major Trump appointee telling you they're ready to connect everybody. Robert McDowell, who's a former FCC commissioner.
Yes, he makes the rounds.
Are honest people. They just are misguided in their ideology, and they come to, these aren't crooks being paid off. He, in a statement with Mignon Clyburn, I mean, when I first got to Washington 20 years ago, I thought they were crooks. Okay?
You just said they were crooks. I just want to let that marinate. There's a lot of parts of this I've enjoyed, but that one's really good. I appreciate that. He's gonna love that. David is gonna be so tickled with this. Go ahead.
I actually gave a compliment to him on something else. Okay. He's not a close friend. I've met him a few times. But the reason I'm mentioning this is that McDowell also said the guys on the other side, in the political end of it, want to connect everybody because they understand that it really is serious that when they can't go to school, they can't do the online thing. So what I want to leave you with is the interesting problem for you is how to take the fact that some of them agree with you, not the lobbyists, unless you get them off the record, but some of the people who make the decisions agree with you that it should be done, and you want to figure out how. And that has nothing to do with the process of whether we listen to this community or that community. It has to do with power politics in
Yeah.
DC
Yeah.
and some folks we both know. And we
Mhm.
know most of them actually want to do right. They
Yes.
just have beliefs that, well, the market will solve it. And
Yes.
so how do you get the people who now are seeing that something should be done to actually do it? And that's where I was trying to drive you.
Got it. Okay. And so on our frolic, I just want to make sure I respond to just a couple of things that you mentioned. One of the things about the companies on who's actually providing 5G, I don't have information on that, but what I do know is that local officials are hopeful that they're able to deliver on some of their promises. And I think that the truth is
But
that most consumers don't realize.
Slow down there. Slow
Okay.
down there. Because what I said was they can't. And every engineer in the business knows that the promises that you're hearing in Washington, including
Yeah.
from the people at Verizon who are building this stuff, are lies. That what's being built in 5G is just not, it's good for the industry, it gives us more capacity. I earn my living writing about it.
Mhm.
But you don't want to see, will they deliver on the promise? I can tell you right now, they won't. So that's,
Got
you
it.
have to think of it different. 5G does absolutely nothing for your people, the people
And
you care
I
about.
totally and I totally respect your opinion. I just want to make sure that as I'm cloaked in an organization, I want to be very clear about what I'm representing and who I'm speaking for. And I cannot speak for, whether or not certain providers are keeping their promises, and don't pretend to have some insights on that. What I do know is that I agree with you wholeheartedly that there are a lot of people on different sides of the aisle who their politics demands a different ideology, where they're essentially saying the market will solve this problem. And I think that the truth is that COVID made it abundantly clear that that is not true. Not in this case. This is not just going to solve itself. And a few weeks ago, we had an Aspen Roundtable. David did a presentation on the digital divide, which was a pleasant surprise. I was glad to see it. And I think that the truth is that I don't know that I'm going to be able to, baptize Republicans in my ideas of what to do any more than I am able to get Democrats to move a certain way. And quite frankly, as an independent person, I think a lot about the fact that we need to stop thinking about this along political lines, because if you're disconnected, you're disconnected. If you're poor, you're poor. Like, we have a whole lot of problems that it really doesn't matter what my political stripes are. So I think that sometimes I'm trying to get to the core of what are the policy solutions that we can really actually agree on. If providers don't want to go to certain communities, how can we find ways to teach communities to do it for themselves? How can we actually partner with, whether or not it's community colleges, other anchor institutions, other people who've been there and are invested, teach them how to build their own networks, teach them how to tap into unlicensed spectrum, teach them how to find ways to actually fill in gaps where providers don't want to go and don't see a return. And really thinking about changing our metrics on, are we talking about a return means that you actually have to have dollars, or is the return saying we have 100% of our enrolled students have access to internet? Is that a good metric? Is that a good place to start? So being able to reframe how we actually assign value to some of this data. And then finally, I do want to make sure that I'm always really thinking carefully about, I don't mean to offend when I say that people who are connected sometimes just don't care. But the truth is that if you didn't care before, as in you were indifferent, this is the time to care. Because we are now, even if you were in a cloud and thought, if my family's okay, if I'm okay, we're okay, everything's fine, we know that that calculation is misguided. And so I think that we need to really think carefully about, wherever you are in this equation, whether you are a concerned citizen, you have power. If you are a local official, you have power. If you have our state official, maybe you don't have the money in your state, but you have a platform, you have power. If you are a member of Congress and are saying, well, the agency of jurisdictions, the FCC, it's not my issue, you still have power. Like, everybody has something that they can contribute to this. and really thinking carefully about not just saying we're committed to closing the digital divide, but actually saying, this is my piece of it. This is what I can do in this part of me being a stakeholder, and then keeping our promise. So that's all I can ask of people. And I think that, I'm aware of the fact that there are limits on, the things that I can share on behalf of my organization, but we wholeheartedly believe in being able to extend connectivity to every single community of every shape and size and political stripe. And so we're not going to rest until we get there. So I always welcome ideas, whether or not they're from people that I agree with.
Francella Ochilo, that was wonderful. Well, thank you. That was a heck of a wrap up.
I wanted to make sure I got that on my notes.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for joining Dave and myself on Community and Technology this afternoon. It's been very informative, and I'd like to have you back. I see that you're going to be doing a roundtable with the New York officials soon.
Roundtable, New York officials on June 24th. And so just in light of Governor Cuomo actually assembling a commission, we thought that it was worth rounding up with local officials in the state just to get some ideas together on what they'd like to see that commission address. So definitely all local officials are welcome to join.
Can you come back next month and tell us about that?
I promise I will. And then
Okay.
I'll make sure that I've and then Dave can send me some filings he wants to spar about. It's going to be amazing.
Okay, well, thank you. We've been talking with Francella Ochilo, Executive Director of Next Century Cities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Have a beautiful day. Bye.
Thank you, you too. Okay. Good night. Night, Dave.
So
I found out on my way